and shortcut our route to success. I think I try to apply that in every area, or that's what books are as well to me. That really kind of pushed me towards the EPAT direction. And I think just right off the bat, I just realized, yeah, there's a lot of good information here that I'd never even kind of thought about. My name is Kurt, and I'm from San Diego in California. My background is computer engineering from UC San Diego. And one of the biggest reasons I fell into this was just kind of seeing where history is and just being absolutely fascinated with the computer. And I was just blown away. I learned how to find kid ticks on MS-DOS from my dad because he was always building computers in the office around me. And eventually, I was not loving a lot of my classes. I felt like I was having trouble understanding some of the professors. I felt like there was a lot of people who were there who were very, very smart and intelligent. However, they were there to not to teach first, but they were there to kind of do some of their academic and research. So because of that, that's when I decided to take a little bit of personal initiative, and I started exploring what a few friends were working on in projects at the campus. One specifically that I really fell in love with was the National Geographic Engineers for Exploration. And my friend, he was developing drones in order to find Genghis Khan's tomb over in Mongolia, where they had a little bit of issues where they couldn't bring out a helicopter, and drone technology was at just its beginning. It was not like today where you can just go and buy a drone on Amazon for $500. So this is back in the day. So it involved a lot of soldering. It involved a lot of little micro adjustments with the FCB, the flight control board, playing around with the props and pitches and all of these things. And honestly, I absolutely fell in love with that world and robotics. So that is kind of when I started really kind of being just curious about the topic of robotics, machine learning. And even in college, I was taking a few classes on linguistics because I was very curious about how might you eventually want to teach a computer. And I figured a good spot of learning, a good place of learning would be to see how do kids learn, and really kind of breaking it down in terms of neurons and really kind of looking at it layer per layer. What is it that you give a kid or a machine, and how do they learn from that? Are they overfitting their learning experience so that way it's only within that domain, or are they actually learning a more general principle that they can take away and apply elsewhere? Now, before I even got to that, one time I hit my head really, really hard because I like to surf, and one time I was skateboarding, and I skateboarded and I hit my head very, very hard. And that was a weird little time for me because I went through a time where I felt like I was having some trouble with people's names and just memory in general. So I took it upon myself to study memory a little bit more and to have a bit, a better understanding of the processes of memory. Can we make it more efficient? What would make it more efficient? What is the journey to get there, or the actual process of accomplishing better memory, and what is the actual focus that you're focusing on? So that might be like a Pareto's principle, 80-20, what you focus on for 20%, and 80% of the result. And that is actually how I eventually brought those principles to learn 2 other languages. Because I felt like when I was at university, I felt like I was having a little bit of issue. Like, I love math. I've always been very good at math. I think even a lot of the kids kind of cheated off me in the math classes. But I felt like my programming class and skill was always average, subpar. So because of that, I felt like I was doing a lot of copying. I would do reading on Stack Overflow all the time. And we would be stuck in what we call the dungeons at UC San Diego. And this is all before kind of figuring out, right before hopping into the drone life. So that was a little bit of background there. And then I fell in love. I was doing the drone thing for a few years after college. And I reached a point where I was not super stoked about just the direction, because I realized I wanted to work in a startup in order to free up my time, in order to be able to see friends and to travel the world and to surf and do a bunch of things I love and that are dear to me. Now, what I ended up finding is that within the startup, you have to wear a lot of different hats. And that's fine with me, but I think eventually at that time in my life, I just reached a little bit of the burnout. I had a couple of people pass away that were very close to me, and that created a shift in my value system. And that launched me into the idea of traveling in South America for 2 years. And that's when I was very fortunate enough to stay with a lot of very kind people, have a lot of different experiences working with all sorts of people from all over the world in different jobs, odd jobs. And I think that really helped me to kind of get a little bit more of a perspective rather than sitting behind a computer. And I think it was that time where I was still kind of developing myself, and I felt like I wanted to learn, and I just got the thirst for knowledge. Back in high school, we would read books that I had read out of high school, and I felt like, I don't know, there's something about school that just kind of removed the willingness to read for me, because I felt like maybe it was always another subject that was being forced on me. However, when I was able to explore subjects that were important to me or that I was just naturally curious about at that time, I felt like a machine. I was just going and going and going. And I had those principles with me about how to do accelerated learning, what to focus on, how to remember more. And I really just, there's a little while there where I would just consider it a success if I could hike a mountain and listen to a book at the same time. Now, the reason why that's important for this area is because that brought me into a couple of different areas of life: health, wealth, love, happiness. And with one of them was wealth. So that was my introduction to reading all sorts of books and becoming privy to a lot of very great thinkers and smart minds and how they actually thought about the world and their perspectives. And I was really trying to absorb that as much as possible. So it would be, a little bit more on the philosophical side, but within the financial side, yeah. Warren Buffett, Peter Lynch, Charlie Munger, David Dodd, Benjamin Graham. And then I would read lots of biographies as well, from Elon Musk to Philip Knight to, of course, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates. And I'd be very curious about what is the perspective that these guys have that makes them so special. Like one of my original reasons for choosing. So my dad is, he was a chemical engineer, and my brother was computer science, and I essentially just chose the combination of those two when I was going to college. But really the biggest reason I chose that was because, I was looking at technology, I was looking at the history of the world and technology, and it kind of blew my mind. Because I love this little mind thought game of if I were to bring whatever I knew back today, 2,000 years ago even, could I convince people that what I knew was not magic? Essentially, that I can have a small metal box in my pocket and communicate to anybody else in the world instantaneously. Now, at that time, that would have just seemed completely magic. And then I was privy to the idea of just whoa, this is crazy. Because I grew up, I played a lot of video games and that sort of thing. And I even, had AOL right at that time. And so I saw the internet, and I saw the internet for what it was, just this is an amazing opportunity that's really going to unlock so many different things. And my parents were both in the .com era and working at the Fortune 500 companies. And I was always, as a kid, kind of thinking all right, so before we could fit about 100 transistors into the size of a big room, and now we can fit 1 billion onto the size of your fingernail, and only that is improving as well. And so that idea of just oh my God, so if we have the computing power and we've already kind of gotten a little bit of mastery over some of the industrials as far as, machine working and machinery, the logic and the thought to me was the next logical step to kind of figure it out. And I always kind of figured it would make more sense to work smarter rather than harder. And I kind of originally was always into frameworks. And I figured a framework is just a recipe, which is just a process, which just is an algorithm. And as we're going to have more and more of a proliferation of small devices, they're going to need to talk to each other in some sort of way. And as time goes on, we'll be able to use a smaller word set in order to command more action. And I think about so you could say, yes, now turn on the light bulb, turn off the light bulb. But soon that will, I'm sure, extend to, hey, Alexa, make the factory run faster. As far as you can use really, really high-level commands, and you will be able to invoke a lot of different machine learning or a lot of different machine processes at the exact same time. And so the ability to spool up different workers while we are taking a step back, I felt like that is kind of exponential growth as far as the humanity, but also like just for the retail person, you and I, because in the past, and this is where I hiked, essentially I went to South America for 2 years. Yo puedo hablar español, I can speak Spanish. Yo puedo hablar portugués también. I learned Portuguese too. Languages, but it kind of gave me a little bit more of a appreciation for that. And it just kind of made me realize, like, there's so much you can do with a programming language. And if you learn that language, and that's why I think more and more young people, they should be learning these things in younger school. So that way they have the lens and the filter of when they're seeing the world and opportunities, they can identify an opportunity and be like, oh yeah, like all that is just this process. And maybe, oh, like this is just sweeping over and over and over again. Maybe they can make a decently smart, but also not too smart thing that just cleans up. It has really, I never loved it that much, but I feel like now that I'm kind of getting a little bit more of the hang of things and being able to copy, it's really things and actually understand, opening up a lot of other ideas and opportunities, not just even with this financial fintech smart topic. So I'm gonna throw it back to you and see where you want to keep on taking convo. If you're looking at the Pareto's rule, I got fascinated with the idea. You might have a room, and then as soon as Bill Gates enters into the room, the entire average income of the room lifts. So I started to come across some of these principles, and the original person that gave me the idea was Tim Ferriss, and he would talk about this idea all the time about Pareto principle, 80-20, about what you focus on. But then I started to notice that essentially this is just another version, or what I now know is it's kurtosis. Essentially, you have a normal bell curve, and really you have a lot of different statistics around that are very observable that really shows that a lot is actually concentrated in a few nodes. So actually, the overall way that maybe probability distribution these functions and things work out. Now, it was also on this time when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next that I stumbled upon smart contracts and blockchain. And it was there when I just had my mind absolutely blown because I was traveling around the world, and I got really curious. I started reading books trying to understand why is it that some people have so much in this world and some people have so little. It's a different thing, saying, people who have so little, sometimes honestly some of the happiest and the nicest people I know. So I was very curious about that. And then the next question became, well, great, regardless of the history, what steps specifically should the world take such that you have one big domino that knocks over a bunch of other dominoes? And one of the things that I found was essentially the idea of just smart contracts. And within smart contracts, there's also automations as well. And I would come across this all the time where I would see, Bitcoin and blockchain. And this is where I started finally trading. Even though my dad went to Harvard and he lent me a bunch of his wonderful books, which I'm now devouring. But at that time, I was not as interested in the stock market. And then I was on the road and I needed a way to keep going, essentially. So I was looking at programmable money. And it was very interesting while I was trying to learn what it was, how the blockchain worked, how, signing the time signatures and the stamping, and then all the handshake processes. And, as a note, I was getting absorbed by the world. And then I would also come across some other aspects about how this can really change the future moving forward for a lot of people who don't have access to a typical banking system. where you have people who might travel abroad to the United States or some other place that has a little bit more affluence and send money back, yet that money is being essentially taxed at maybe a 2 or 3%. And I was like, this is a weird idea where I can send an email to somebody else on the other side of the world instantaneously. However, it will take 5 to 7 business days and a wire fee in order for me to send money from me through there. Then I run into other small issues where maybe I wanted to buy a chicken in another country, but at the ATM, you could only get a $50 bill. Now I go to try to pay for the chicken, they don't have change. Now, I ran into a lot of these small little instances, and it just kind of got me absolutely obsessed with the world, and I started just kind of, dabbling and then trading. And, I got lucky a few times at first, and I was like, obviously that caught my attention as far as, things just kind of went up, and I was like, whoa, all right, this kind of feels like funny money now. All right, let me adjust a little bit. So then I hopped out of crypto, and I got obsessed with stocks. And that's when I started listening to what I'll say, like all the greatest investors. And I really wanted to have a better idea of, money, automation, and rules. So that's when I got very much into just really devouring so much information and really trying to understand, the cross-sectional differences of different companies, let's say. Maybe my first stock investment, I guess, was AMD back when it was $2. And I would just use things that I read in a book, and then I would try to apply them, which didn't seem super crazy to me at that time. And still doesn't at this time now, too. And I feel like there's a wealth of knowledge that is in some of these older minds that where I then started to come across like, oh, man, because I would be hiking for, say, 2 weeks, and I would have no computer or no access to the internet, yet there would be certain rules where I would say, well, if the 10-day moving average goes below the 50-day moving average and the earnings report came out dovish and the RSI is moving down along with the MACD is moving down, money flow indicators moving down, then naturally I might want to adjust my position. Now, that was a little bit hard when you're on the road and you don't have access to a computer and you don't have access to the internet. So I think that was kind of like the genesis or the origin, so to say, of kind of thinking like, well, I mean, there's basic rules like past just wanting to put a stop limit or a trailing stop as the stock is moving up. There are some other rules, some other nuances that I might want to apply to it. And I started creating these crazy Excel documents. And this is when I wasn't, even though I had some background in parallel computing, vectorized programming, I had never experienced just how slow things can go if you don't understand those topics. So the errors I was running into, I made these massive Excel documents or Google Sheets documents, and I would try to load it up with information, and I didn't realize some of the nuances of it, where I would put, let's say, an API call in every single one of the boxes rather than kind of doing a giant single pull down. Or I would load the document and I would just have issues with it essentially freezing all the time. And so that was kind of my original pull towards thinking, like, maybe I can find a different way because I'm essentially sorting and getting percentiles and adding rankings, it was depending on their ROIC, ROA, return on assets, are they cheap? And I'd kind of give, I would assign a score, and then that's essentially how I would pick what stocks I would want to look at, especially if it had a drop and it was favorable, then I might use it as an entry point. I was kind of only doing long positions at that time. But yeah, I kept on running into this issue where essentially I wanted to use Google Sheets, and then I would click something on Google Sheets, everything would need to reload, it would crap out. So I just had to kind of start to figure out maybe there's a different way that I could approach this. Because I was trying to create a rules-based system and be like, all right, buy signals, all right, maybe sell or adjust the position. So I started taking a look after I got back from being on the road. I actually, during that time, because I was reading a lot of books on wealth and stocks and real estate and whatnot, and I had a little bit of luck, and I was not spending too many of my resources while I was on the road, I was able to come back and I flipped a house and flipped it to rent it. So that was something else that I worked on last year, just kind of knowing how to get into a house, how to rehab a house, how to hire other contractors, and kind of how to manage that project with all the different moving parts, and just to kind of get it fully done. And I realized from that's actually maybe not the thing I really want to do all the time. While I had a great time doing the design process and kind of working with the contractors, and I feel like I was able to grow a lot as a person doing that, I realized that I feel like the more that I get into this subject, the more I realize that there is a time crunch of essentially there is a opportune moment for a period of time. You have a lot of retail investors who are now entering into the global trade system, where essentially accessibility has dramatically improved. You have the likes of Robinhood, and you have some of these meme stocks. You have the power of the retail investor is finally starting to creep in. And along with that, there's a proliferation of all these crazy tools online that sometimes it's a little hard to figure out, like, how do you sift through all the information? And I found that after I started hitting like, oh, let me listen to, or I guess follow more stocks and more stocks, I think I started to get overwhelmed, when before I was only looking at, say, AMD and then its competitors of NVIDIA, Intel, and then like who was it working with, the STM manufacturing, and what were the deals and whatnot. I was really kind of focusing on cross-market value investing, and who had the potential to increase their market share the most within a market that was already trending up. And that's where I, with the background of computers and electrical engineering, I'd already studied a little bit of the transistor. And I knew at that point that 9 nanometers going down to 7 nanometers was going to be a big step, and that Intel would have a little bit of trouble to compete for at least another 2 to 3 years. So I'm following too many things, and then I got overwhelmed. So I figured I need to kind of take a step back, and if that's the direction I'm trying to go, let me see if I can take more of a rules-based approach to this. And even using some of the stocks that I do know, and maybe I can play around with putting a single stock onto its own game in a way where I wouldn't, instead of just wanting to buy and hold, I can take advantage of, hey, it's a low dip, and let me buy into the momentum, and then sell when it's overextended and expect a mean revert back to a simple moving average. Might be one example. Because I feel like life is more than just staring at stocks moving up and down in a line, right? Like, I think that, this is my hippie in a way though, I think we can attain a high level of consciousness for everybody when we automate some of the small minutia away. So essentially that's the goal. I think there's a lot of tasks and boring tasks. If people find love for that, great. I never did. So I always felt like I wanted to automate away the small tasks that I found dull and boring, so that way we can think about higher level idea tasks and communication. And that essentially kind of brought me towards, just searching online and being like, okay, well, let's see what we got. You'd find a couple different options, but I realized that my programming skill from what it was before was not up to the level. And while I had a very good mathematics background, sometimes there's just like what you don't know that you don't know. So I knew that I would have to, bring forth and, I would have to work a little bit harder in order to improve my math skills. But I did not know some of the math equations even that I did not know that I would need to know. And to me, that's been honestly incredibly useful. For example, I would have never thought of converting it to a log space in order to add, some returns in a more simpler way. So to me, this last 6 months to 9 months, because I kind of been dabbling a little bit for a little while now, has been a tremendous learning time. And what makes me really happy is because, I realized, cryptocurrency may be a very interesting subject in the future, or we'll just say smart contracts in that sort of realm. And then same with, stocks. You have more people who are entering the space. There's just more and more people. I do not see this space slowing down anytime soon. But really, my main goal that I really want to work towards, and I'm working towards, and this space has become the vehicle for me to attain that goal, is I would like to focus all of my efforts on machine learning, because I'm fascinated with the differences of unsupervised learning, supervised learning, reinforcement learning. And I really think you can do a lot by using, let's say, looking at data, using unsupervised learning to find structure, hidden structures in the data, and then to run maybe epochs, which are kind of a reinforcement learning perspective, to run epochs in order to simulate and to generate some data. And now we can run maybe some label supervised algorithms on those simulated data. So that might be one instance. I just think machine learning is very, very interesting. One little small funny thing is my dad's name is Hal. So I grew up and I watched 2001 Space Odyssey. So even since I was young, I think it was implanted in my head of heuristically algorithmic programmed bot. And then I watched a lot of Star Trek as a kid as well. So I've always kind of thought towards the future. And now that I think some of the programming skills have started to kind of juice up a little bit, I'm starting to become very, very excited because the possibilities have now actually opened up. Where before I felt like too hard. Just that was the button. Nope, too hard. Now it really kind of feels like, oh man, we've got a combination of neuro-linguistic programming, also natural language processing, combine those two together, and now we can run some reinforcement or some machine learning algorithms on that, and that can create an entire new possibility. So I see it not only being helpful for fin and fintech, but I think that this is really one of the best avenues to learn machine learning. And one observation that I made was Elon Musk. You read his biographies, of course. He actually started with some mapping, which is essentially, I did some drone stuff, and it helped me to try to visualize the Earth from a different perspective of kind of top down, but kind of just in the mapping world. And then he moved to X.com, then PayPal.com. And from there, he then moved towards some of these other, SpaceX, these other companies. So this fintech world was actually one of the best areas to develop, and I am deeply connected to the principle that I think we're about to come onto a knowledge revolution, so to speak, where we're going to take more of a data-driven decision-making process, or we're gonna be using that more rather than applying models that were MX4 academic. We are going to essentially be looking more at the tinkerers and how people are tinkering and seeing where are the nodes of success, and then trying to extrapolate knowledge from that backwards and being like, all right, here are some nodes that work, here are some nodes that work, and being able to extrapolate from that and say, well, okay, here's a new finding, a new hypothesis that we might be able to form, and then being able to work forward from there. I feel like I did not have a very strong command of programming, or the appreciation for programming. Appreciation for it. So, I learned Java. I started doing some C# and C. Wasn't my thing. I didn't like playing around with the memory quite as low level as that, even though I understood it's a faster language. And then I played around JavaScript because it kind of made sense for me because I took HTML classes all the way back in high school. And this kind of made sense to me of all right, well, JavaScript, instead of bringing in Ruby on Rails or Django, to just kind of have everything be within the same language of JavaScript. But honestly, I felt like it was a little clunky still. It had some beautiful parts, and it got more beautiful as people understood how to use it in a more object-oriented way. But it actually wasn't until I came across, let's say, a book named Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which it kind of gave me the perspective shift, where then I started to appreciate what is beautiful code and what is beautiful about a programming language, rather than just kind of looking at it as ready to go. And I think it wasn't until after I had some more experience with language and the persistence in trying to learn another language that I could really kind of go back and really start to maybe manipulate things in my mind a little bit more. So I would say one of the biggest things before stopping me from algorithmic programming was just having a better knowledge base in the Python language itself. Because I had rules and things I wanted to implement, but I did not know how to go about doing the back testing and then essentially launching the backtest direct live with, because I noticed as soon as I kind of hopped in there, I started moving around. I found some other code online. I became a little confused. For example, like I wanted to use Kelly criterion. I'd been to Vegas before and I understood Kelly criterion and Bayes theorem a long time ago. But I didn't quite understand how to implement a Markowitz chain or whatever. And I didn't realize of like how to kind of use the backtesting in order to kind of give the input, let's say, towards like a Kelly formula. And so there was a lot of things I didn't quite know once I actually got to the implementation phase. So yeah, I would say that's kind of one of the biggest things that was holding me back. And now kind of after really just kind of spending a lot more time with the language. And I feel like one of the biggest differences, honestly, is this is where I feel like the paradigm shift is slowly kind of happening for myself as well. Rather than saying, hey, learn this and then try to go apply that, learn this model in school and then go apply that model, in reality. It's like, here, go find this, learn a skill, and then go find how to apply it. I feel like that learning style never suited me. I feel like I need a result that I'm going for, and then I have the reasons that I want to learn that thing, that subject, and then I can actually learn it. So, example, easy. So like in school, kind of growing up, they might give us Spanish classes, hey, to learn a different language. Now, that's essentially that idea of, hey, learn it in school, then go try to find to apply it. But I guarantee you, try talking to anyone in California who's taken 6 to 9 years of Spanish classes in school. Go pluck them and put them in Colombia or Spain, and I guarantee you that they will not be fully conversational, or they're going to have a lot of errors. So now we backtrack and you just send somebody to Spain and say, now learn it, because now you kind of have to. You're just put into the pits and you kind of like you have to, but you also, most importantly, you have a reason. Now, like I wanted to connect more with the people who I was talking with. And I learned very, very quickly that even though I had my schooling, after we got past who are you, where are you from, where you been, where you going, what do you like to do, what are your parents like, what are your hobbies, that the conversation would devolve into other vocabulary. And then if you only had that structure memorized, as soon as you go off guide, off structure, you're screwed. And it's a funny thing, because I started to notice this contextual domainism in a lot of different people and a lot of different ideas. So another one being maybe people are very interested in wanting to work out. However, they might go to the gym, but they're never willing to take the stairs. That's a little bit of a different idea than what I was just previously talking about. But I just started to see a lot of these nuances a lot more after I status quo, or my normal we'll call it my normal reality of self in the United States. Because it's not, I feel like, until you kind of remove whatever is you perceive as normal, then you start to kind of, or for myself at least, I started to understand more deeply a lot of these other concepts. And I felt like as a concept would enter, it'd be like, oh, like a deep, like, aha, like, oh my God, like I've read that so many times, but now I just read that and like, I feel I finally got it. So I guess with that idea then, I think I had approached some of these principles before, but I just didn't get it, honestly. And spending a little bit of time away with myself, going on through different curiosities, and not just trying to pound wealth, or learning stocks or learning programming, and kind of taking a little more of a holistic view of the world, and kind of just trying to stay curious and really trying to maximize curiosity, and using that as your meter for success and happiness, I guess, of how curious of a person you are, rather than what is your journey or process or wherever you are in that journey. So I think kind of having a couple of those perspective shifts allowed me to see Python and programming, like Python, beautiful language, and look at this and say like, oh my gosh, like I can do that. It's going to take a lot of work, but like now I believe that I can do it. And so I think that belief is just as important. So within that kind of searching, I kind of stumbled upon a couple of different sites. One was, I think, Quantopian. Another was Interactive Brokers and EPAT, and kind of like the plethora of different, I don't know. I'm not really sure exactly what spoke to me a little bit about EPAT, but I definitely realized that there's a lot of things that I thought I knew, and I thought I was a little cocky and smart on some things, but like I really did not know. And it was extremely useful kind of having some things being really just kind of broken down. Because like I'd seen kind of some of this code structure about, let's say, using, the log space essentially to, add returns together, and, using a cumulative sum, plot, and seeing 4 different things on the same line. And I just remember looking at some of those lines and being like, I don't get what's going on. I even had some experience with like machine learning. I understood, gradient descent and whatnot, which not the subject, I guess, but like I had some like math principles, and like I was trying to apply them in the Python world. And then I just realized that I did not have the skill set that I needed in order to truly understand this. And what I also realized is like, while I could have waited and really kind of gone onto a bunch of different spots onto YouTube, let's say, and done the self-learning myself, I really cherish the idea that everybody needs mentors. Everybody needs, while we can walk the path alone, it is much easier if we know a mentor or a guide, essentially, who has been to the top of the mountain and can share some right order and speed, so that way we can shortcut our route to success, whatever that success is. I think I try to apply that in every area, or that's what books are as well to me. And so that really kind of like pushed me towards the EPAT direction. And I think just right off the bat, I just was realizing, there's a lot of good information here that I'd never even kind of thought about. And now I can, from scratch, and it's funny because even when I go surfing, I'll look at code right before. Sometimes I feel like it's good to kind of step back and away, and I'll be able to actually program in my mind, different structures and different ideas. And like, literally, I kind of close my eyes, like, all right, let me, import, let me get the data, let me, compute signals, compute technicals, let me design the model, let me plot it, let me analyze it. And I can actually, because now I know the structure, which was all taught to me by EPAT, I can kind of ignore the structures that I don't need to be thinking about at the time, and I can really kind of break up a huge, what seems like a monumental task, into a smaller step, or smaller steps. And that way I can, step by step, really know and realize on a deep level what is my hypothesis and how am I applying it to the market, and what other parameters and variables should I maybe tweak in case I feel like I'm overfitting, all of which are principles I also learned in EPAT. And one principle for sure that was extremely useful was just kind of really getting into some of the nuance about how to not forward bias, or to have bias by forward looking into the future. And I feel like there would have been a bunch of errors I knew I would have made had I not known what I did not know. The easy example is like, if you're back testing and you're using, let's say, the close end of day for that day, you're essentially looking into the future, and that is more of a it's a hard thing. Like, you wouldn't just get that from looking at the code and looking at you really have to have a deep understanding of data and how things are broken up. And I think actually one of the most useful aspects of the entire course, it was because I had spent a lot of time on Microsoft Excel, Google Sheets, and whatnot, trying to build these essentially models for stocks, and bringing in and kind of doing it all manually by hand. So I had a strong background in Google Sheets. It was very, very useful seeing the step-by-step, cell-by-cell breakdown of how the information trickulates across and is populated, just from a formulaic kind of cell by cell. Because now I realize I can do higher levels of manipulation of data in my head. And now when I'm on, let's say, a Jupyter notebook, I don't need to reference or copy something, because now I can just look at the data and I know what I want the data to do in order to clean, to prepare it, to normalize it. And I can just do it just by looking at the data and knowing where I want it to be, and then manipulating that data. And that was, those are all skill sets that I learned through EPAT. So yeah, to me, it's been incredibly useful. I'm feeling a little empowered, I guess, so to speak. It feels like, oh my God, I learned some magic, and now I can bring in data from any API. I can work with any API, so I can bring in data from Yahoo Finance. I can bring in data from IEX or Polygon or Refinitiv or all of these different data exchanges. I can bring in news data. I can bring in stock, price, fundamental, technical data, and I can bring that all into one area. And now I know how to manipulate that data. And now if I want, I can just start an algorithm, or if I want, I can input that into a machine learning algorithm, because it's all the same kind of structure. And yeah, I mean, to me, like, that makes me excited, because I think curiosity really drives me, and it's cool knowing and thinking and feeling that, like, hey, like, if you have an idea, you can actually implement it. You can actually just make it. So right now, one interesting topic for me is maybe how do you combine chatbot with algorithms, and where that might go in the future as well. And I've never had the I be like, I need to go hire somebody to do that. I would always be like, I need to go hire somebody to do this. But now, after I have a little bit of marketing background now too, I feel like, oh yeah, wait, I can actually kind of do this. So yeah, I think there's a couple very, very useful skill sets that I learned through QuantInsti and EPAT, and I think especially breaking it down cell by cell in a Google Sheet or a Microsoft Excel sort of formula, and seeing how that relates to the code itself was extremely helpful for me. So yeah, I'm very happy and pretty stoked about what I'm about to go do. So like one huge thing is really kind of having a deep understanding of data. Really just kind of like almost just drawing out a cube and looking at it and just kind of thinking about how would you maybe want to move things around, because really that's, in the end, what we're doing is we have a cube of data or a cube of panels of data, and we're just trying to understand that data and manipulate it, right? So before hopping into the programming, I think it's really important to kind of have a deeper understanding of some of these other principles. Otherwise, the programming may be a little bit frustrating. And the other thing is really kind of hold dear the fact that the effort that you put in grows exponentially. So imagine if you were to, figure out some sort of trading bot that has, let's say, even an alpha, let's say it's 2 or 3% above the market, and you had that for, 10 years, where would that put you now? And maybe if you can create enough of a goal in your mind, an island, so to speak, in your mind, about what is it that you truly want in life, and is that enough money or whatever, is that going to satisfy? You really kind of make it tangible. Write down, how much do you need to survive in a month or in a year, and really kind of like put it down on the paper and be like, all right, Ian, what is my ideal life? And how much would I need in order to finance that life? Because then the question becomes a little bit more of, how can I make this happen, rather than can I make this happen? And I think that little mental switch about how can I find the tools in order to make sure that I, can handle my risk management, how I'm going to find the tools and develop the knowledge in my Python programming. Always have the result in mind before you begin. You sit down and really kind of think it through. What is your goal before you start trying to actually type out anything? And the other thing is too, whenever you leave each day, have a little journal. Write down where you're at. What is the problem you're currently trying to solve? Because there's going to be a lot of tax time as far as onloading and offloading. Because it will take us when you're doing programming, you might be juggling a lot of different files, a lot of different ideas in your mind, and it takes a little bit of time to get into that mental state. So really, I would say block off larger time periods when you are doing your programming, and really respect the fact that it might take you a little bit. It might take you even like an hour or 2 hours to start to remember, okay, here are all the different pieces. And then you'll have 30 minutes, maybe even, of really efficient coding. But that on-ramp and off-ramp time does take time. So just make sure to respect that and don't constantly be switching tasks. So figure out the thing that you want to solve for that day. Try to solve it that day, because if you have to come back the next day, you have to put yourself back into that same spot, and you have to remember all the different pieces and all your different tabs. So figure out break it down in small chunks, and really think about what is the small chunk that you are going to 100% finish today. And then have that result in your mind, why you want to do it. And then at the end of the day, make a note about whatever you're thinking about. What are some of the nuances or whatever things you're thinking about? Step away for a moment. It can be really frustrating if you're like just trying to go and bang your head against the table and be like, I got to figure it out right now. Take a step back, go for a walk. And I think our brain subconsciously does a lot of problem solving while we sleep and while we're doing things that are outside, which I know is the funny thing in this world sometimes. But yeah, go outside because staying healthy, happy, and eating right is just as important for your brain in order to solve these problems. If you don't have that right, then when you're sitting in front of the computer, things are moving slower, you get frustrated. So, take not just, I got to do this, I got to do this, but why are you doing this? How do you live a little bit more balanced, and make sure that you prepare or pre-frame your brain for the right steps. So that way you can actually tackle the problems at the hand.